Hello and welcome to Creating a Family, talk about adoption, foster care, and kinship care. My name is Tracy Whitney. I am the content director for Creating a Family and your host for this podcast, as well as our other podcast that's a very short, practical, advice-driven podcast that drops every Saturday. So we hope you'll take a minute to listen to Weekend Wisdom, as well as enjoy the conversation that we're going to have here today in this format. My guest today is Robyn Wind. She is the Grand Voices Support Coordinator at the National Center on Grandfamilies. She provides coordination and support to Generations United's national network of family and grandfamily caregivers. Prior to joining Generations United, Robyn worked for about 15 years in Indian child welfare, primarily in foster care leadership. She has served for several years as the chair of the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association's Substitute Care Committee. She has been a grand voice for Generations United now for 4 years and is also a caregiver for her grandchild and her mother. She's living in Oklahoma and holds tribal citizenship within the Muskogee Creek Nation. So we're thrilled to have you here with us today, Robyn. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking today about sandwich caregivers. And so let's start with a working definition of what the sandwich generation is.
Yes, ma'am. My understanding is that definition of the term sandwich generation is those of us who are caring for children as well as caring for elderly relatives or friends. So we're stuck right in the middle.
Gotcha. And how have you seen that definition evolve in the years that you've been working with these organizations?
So I come from a tribal community, and caring for elders and our children is just something that we do. So I didn't really realize that it was a thing. Being a sandwich generation was a thing, right? But then,
Right.
as I've done this for longer, I realized that, there's a lots and lots of people who are doing this. So I feel like that, as more people, maybe of my generation, are having to do this, there's more awareness.
So you've seen awareness increase, which I guess is a good thing for people to know what's going on.
Right.
Or to know that they're part of the sandwich.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, from your work with the National Center on Grandfamilies and Generations United, what are you seeing right now that tells you that this is becoming indeed a bigger population or a bigger issue for both populations?
Most of my work for Generations United and our National Center on Grandfamilies has to deal with kinship caregiver advocates and kinship caregiving. So, with working with hundreds of our grand voices and other kinship caregivers, I know that there's a pretty good, population of people who are, doing both. We're caring for our grandchildren, our other relatives, and, or maybe our parents. And it feels like as the economy may not be as great as it once was, that seems to be a little bit more prevalent and people are paying attention.
So, economy issues, demographics, and our aging population that's not being replaced
Yes.
by the younger generation, or maybe families moving away from each other and needing to readjust and figure out how to manage both sides of the equation.
Yes, ma'am. And there,
Yeah.
like I said, I come from a tribal community, so, it's just a thing we do. We take care of each other.
Yeah.
But, other families separate or they move across the country to work. And then there's the issue of trying to figure out how to provide care for someone who's 2 or 3 states away.
Right. Right. So, what are some of the common pressures that you hear caregivers in the middle of the sandwich expressing?
There's a lot, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of cons, but there's also a lot of pros. So some of the pressures would be, just for me, it was exhaustion. And
Mm,
I kind of got thrown into this situation quickly.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
just trying to figure out how to navigate your loved one's care in addition to your grandchild's care or your child's care, everyone's doctor's appointments. There's also, financial issues. There's a lot. And all of that, there's, your own health. You have to take care of yourself so that you're able to care for others. So finding a balance within all of that is, pretty difficult, especially if you're trying to work full time. It's a lot.
Yeah. So emotional load, physical load, health loads, resource loads, financial loads,
Yes.
logistics, getting everybody to where they need to be for
Yep.
therapies and rehab and all those things. Yeah.
And you can forget about personal time
Right.
because your
Right.
personal time is limited. Some,
Yeah.
not necessarily in my family, but in many families, there are family conflicts. Someone might decide that maybe memory care is the best option for their loved one, while, maybe a sibling decides that that's not the best option. So
Right. Right.
there, there's many.
Yeah. So where are the kind of the pain points where you see these caregivers feeling maybe the most pulled apart or the most like they have to choose?
I think a lot of that is the physical and emotional exhaustion and the stress and mental load, because these other things like financial issues and, making and keeping doctor's appointments and trying to figure out what the plan of care is, not only for your loved one, but, your child too, your grandchild or your own personal children, that all kind of ties into the physical and emotional exhaustion. And it's very tiring. And there's constant demands and little downtime.
Yeah. I heard one caregiver phrase it as competing needs.
Yes.
So my parents have needs and my children have needs and I have needs and they're all competing. None of them are collating.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you hear a lot about guilt or divided loyalties or kind of feeling like these caregivers are failing both sides of the sandwich?
I do hear that. And children need your full attention, and they need because you are the person who's going to, you're raising them, and you're teaching them how to be little people. And
Yeah.
while your parent or relative has already lived their life, but many people feel very close to their parent or relative, and they don't want to let those parents or relatives down. So you kind of have to figure out, how you're going to do it and who's more important. For me, it's my grandchildren.
Yeah, kind of doing that cost risk assessment of I can let this need table for a little while. I need to deal with this need first, and the table might flip, and I might be able to, put my child off for a little bit and then get to my parents' needs. All the pressures that go into that. It's you said it well at the beginning that emotional load can be so aggressive, for lack of a better word. Yeah. So, how does this maybe show up for a parent of a young child versus a parent of a teenager who's then also caring for an elderly family member?
Well, young children need a lot of attention. They so with us, my grandson is 12 now, but he's very active in sports. So as an example, last fall, we were at a football game that he'd been, this was his arch rival, and then I get a call from emergency services that they had taken my mother back to the hospital because she was lonely, or she called
Yeah.
911 and they wanted me to come get her then from the hospital. So, it's hard to
Yeah.
explain to my grandson why I have to miss his big play because I have to go pick up my mother, who
Yeah.
didn't really understand why she does some of the things that she does. But, with my older granddaughters, my oldest one is 16, they understand, and they have seen, my mother, what she was like before
Hmm.
her dementia really set in. So they kind of get it and they kind of understand. But it's more difficult to explain to a younger child
Yeah.
what the issue is and then explain why you have to care for both of them at the same time. When grandma is grown. She should be able to take care of herself.
Right. And a child's perspective, right. That's a great point because a child's perspective is very inward focused.
Right. Mhm.
It's my play. I want my mommy here. I want my grandmommy here. and that's what I want, and so I think that's what I should get. And they don't necessarily understand that there's a way bigger perspective that you in the middle are trying to balance all the time. That's well said. Hey, listeners, is this conversation about stretching yourself between two generations resonating with you? Do you feel like you need a safe place to connect with others who are in the same shoes that you're in? We'd love it if you would join our online community at facebook.com/groups/creatingafamily for opportunities to learn and grow with other members who are representing all facets of the adoptive, foster, and kinship caregiving relationships. And if you know someone else who's a sandwich caregiver, please tell them about today's episode and share the link from our site or wherever else you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks so much, and we'll let you get back to the interview. Many of our listeners are already parenting children who've experienced trauma or other complex needs as kinship caregivers. So how does that layer into the already existing pressures of sandwich generation caregiving with elderly family members?
Since many of us, the reason we are caring for our children is because of, there's some reason. There's some sort of trauma has happened or some sort of disruption. Sometimes when there is, when you begin caring for an elderly caregiver that maybe has dementia, it's like it's magnified on both ends.
Right.
So
right.
I feel like, those traumas and things can be magnified because they don't understand what's going on. And then you have to factor in, you might have therapy with your grandchild, but you also have to be at home because the nurse is coming to the house.
Right.
So it's like juggling 5 or 6 different balls. Is that making sense?
Yes, it does. And kids who've had traumatic experiences are not always patient with the waiting for the attention that they need from their caregivers. They're not always able to transition between activities very well. So sometimes it takes a little longer to get them out the door for therapy. And you're on a tight timeline. So you've got to get to therapy and back before the nurse shows up. I get what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. Because all those parts of trauma that impact our kids then also impact all the other decisions that we make.
Right. And just in our situation, there was a lot of trauma with my grandson, but, my mother just honestly was not the best mother. So I had to make a conscious decision that, he saw her act, off and kind of a little violent one time. And I had to make the decision that it is more important for him to feel safe and
Right.
cared for and loved and nurtured than it is for her to, to whether it was because of her brain issues or not, than it was for her to feel better because she could throw a fit because she couldn't find the right purse.
Right.
So,
and that goes back to that emotional load that you were talking about, because you're making decisions that you never pictured yourself making, and many times don't even feel equipped to make.
right.
But when the rubber meets the road and you have to choose, the child's safety, of course, is the priority then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you are looking at kind of the system that's supporting all the systems that are supporting all of these things, caring for a grandchild who's experienced trauma, caring for an elderly parent who's, maybe sliding into dementia or is, dealing with mobility issues or any of those things. How do you see the ways that the systems around us in our communities unintentionally are failing the caregivers in the middle?
Okay, well, in preparation for our talk today, I just decided to Google the sandwich generation. And so when I did, this is what I got. It said, caregivers in the sandwich generation, or those caring for aging parents while also supporting children, have access to a wide range of financial, practical, emotional, and workplace resources in the United States. Well, I don't know who those caregivers are, but that definitely wasn't my experience. So,
Right, right.
what I have found to be most helpful to me is community resources.
Yeah.
So, there are big national organizations like caregiveraction.org and AARP that are really helpful, and they've got great guides. But for me personally, and living in Oklahoma and in a rural area, the local and community supports were the most helpful to me. Like we had Meals on Wheels come in, and the area agency on aging was helpful. But issues that we're running into now is that there are funding cuts. So it's very hard to find assistance or, even which direction to be pointed in. And that's not just, caregivers. It's also, the social workers that work in the hospitals
Yeah.
or that are dealing with insurance issues now. So it's a lot.
Yeah. So funding funnels down to actual resources and actual staffing and people like that. So those are ways that things are falling through the cracks that, of course, these systems that are set up have, wonderful intentions, but the unintentional consequence of the bigger systematic changes trickle down to having a hard time finding respite care, having a hard time finding meal support, having a hard time finding education to help you prepare for your grandchild's educational needs. How do you advocate for them and things like that? So, yeah, I hear that. I actually hear that from a lot of kinship caregivers in general, even if they're not caring for elderly family members, they're still having a hard time accessing the rubber meets the road kind of resources that they need.
Agreed. And not all of us are 55 and over.
Right.
So
Right.
sometimes we don't have access to some of the things that the area agencies on aging have.
Right.
Younger.
Right. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. If you could craft an ideal system, what would better support look like for these multi-generational families that are kind of doing both ends of the spectrum?
Well, of course, funding, but I feel like communities know how best to take care of our own.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be, more involvement that could be, more activities. For example, maybe some of the elders might be interested in going fishing that day, and there may be children who would like to learn how to fish, right? So just more activities, more funneling, and more pouring into their communities because,
Yeah.
you know, someone who lives in my mom's small community south of Tulsa is more likely to, help her build a ramp into her home than someone who, works at the state government in Oklahoma City,
Right.
right?
Or the national organizations,
Yes.
right? Yeah, that's
Yes.
great. Yeah. So community-based care for the elderly and for the children and for the people in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah. Where can families find that community-based care?
So, like I mentioned before, my best resources were contacting my local area agency on aging, and they were able to, they have lists or, 211 works great too when
Yeah.
because I didn't know what to do. I still don't know what to do most days.
We're all learning as we go, right?
Yes. So, and that was with my mother, but also there are a lot more community agencies that help with children, mental
Yeah.
health services. We all need that. It's important for the caregivers to make sure that they have what they need as far as physical and mental
Yeah.
health.
So your area agency on aging, caseworkers at the school, in the school
Yes.
district can be great resources. Your pediatrician's office can be a great
Yes.
resource.
Also, if you live in a community where there's a strong tribal presence, our tribal program, there's a wealth of tribal programs depending upon where you live. A lot of people forget about tribes, and also there are certain organizations within the community, like religious communities. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it just takes, well, almost all the time, it takes, just your time to be able to gather up these resources
Yep. Yep.
to help you get through what you need to get through.
Yeah. Time to sit and search up veterans organizations
Yes.
and local community clubs and things like that that have that focus on supporting families. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, any of those kinds of organizations are connected to other organizations. And so if that first phone call isn't going to be your first stop, they may be able to send you on the way to someone else who can help you. So again, it's that time, which you said at the very beginning, none of us have when we're in the middle
Right.
of caring for elderly parents and young children or children in the home. But you brought up something that is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and you mentioned self care. We talk a lot here at Creating a Family about self care. We talk about secondary trauma stress, burnout, all those things. In your experiences working with these grand families and the multi generational caregivers, what are some of the early signs that a caregiver is stretched too thin and is at risk of burnout or secondary trauma stress?
Sure. I think some of the earliest time or signs would be, just exhaustion. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's the first thing. Or, if you're a planner, being unable to have the time to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And also, probably one of the very first things that happens is, your health is you start getting colds or your allergies just are extra bad or,
Yeah.
you know, just forgetfulness, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So, what does realistic self care look like for this season of life when you're in between the sandwich?
Well, what I would like to say is that, we all have access to the care that we need ourselves, both, medical and mental and behavioral health, but that's not always the case. So what has helped me and some others is, I'm not the best planner. So I have to have like, a plan and I have to have a routine and
Yeah. Yeah.
have to have the week planned out to know exactly who's got to be where when, including myself. So that's been the biggest help that I have heard of. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of others, but that's the biggest thing is so that I can at least sit and look and see, okay, this is next. And, I have to be sure and be asleep by 10 o'clock tonight because we have to be at the hospital at 7 in the morning, you know?
So, planning is a tool for self care.
Yes.
I would recommend that if you struggle in any of those areas, planning or holding yourself accountable to, resting, exercising, eating healthy, all those things, find a buddy in your life who is somebody that is good at those things. And chances are, if you're not skilled in those things, then you do have at least one person in your life that you're close to who is, because as they say, opposites attract. And it's good to just share back and forth. And you may be able to offer something to that person who's, struggling in an area, but finding people in your life around you that can help you. None of us should be doing this alone, first of all. So getting that support network around you. But second of all, scheduling it and planning it, whether you need help to do that or not, holds you to the calendar. And so just like you would treat your grandchild's therapy session as an appointment that you can't break, then you can learn and train yourself how to, have that 30-minute meditation session or yoga session or journaling session that you hold as an appointment for yourself that you won't break.
Yes. And I think also it's important to set boundaries and know, when it's okay to say no, or
Yeah.
I have a hard time doing that.
Yeah.
And other than, planning and staying organized and taking breaks, asking for help. And then, I'm blessed to have, a small farm. So we have animals and I'm telling you, 10 years ago, there's no way I would have walked outside just to watch a chicken scratch in the dirt, but it's just finding small things that give you joy.
Yeah.
I like to paint, even though I'm awful at it. So if I can take 30 minutes to paint and not think about anything else, that's great.
Yeah. That's great. All very practical suggestions. And I love that. How do you advise the caregivers that you're supporting in your role to balance the feelings of guilt or inadequacy or any of those difficult emotional loads that we mentioned earlier? When there's so much need on both sides, how do you tell them to start the balancing process?
So I think the most important thing is to find someone who is in a similar situation. whether you can find a
Hmm.
support group or I'm fortunate that with working with the Grand Voices, I have so many who are going through the same thing I am, whether it be with my grandchildren or the death of my son or caring for my mom.
Hmm.
Just finding someone who has a similar situation and a lot of times just listen to you or they might have more insight on resources you can access as well. So that is what I always advocate for starting with is find other people like you.
So that's a good small starting point. And I love that because unless there's really extreme circumstances going on, it usually isn't that hard to find someone else who's going through something similar to what you're going through.
Mhm. It's
So that's
true.
a great point. But what are the other supports that caregivers should start putting into place when they're feeling or when they're identifying, oh, maybe I am in this sandwich generation and I'm getting kind of pressed by the two sides of the sandwich. What are kind of some other important supports they can look for?
Well, I fortunate that I have a close relationship with my physician. So, you know, oftentimes if I don't notice it, he notices, oh, Robyn, your blood pressure's up. Or so there are other supports there of people who are in your life, like physicians or the community that you are in.
So earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that sometimes sibling relationships when caring for elderly family members can get a little dicey and challenging. What are some things that you suggest would help them share the load more effectively or be more productive in caring for both sides of the sandwich?
So I think one of the most important things is having, and working to build strong family bonds
Mm,
because that you are able to build and maintain those deep, meaningful relationships within all these generations. And sometimes, like you said, my sibling may not think that what I think is the best thing for mother is memory care. So I feel like, having the sit down and having a discussion if you can prior to, because
mm,
in certain situations, it's going to end in a particular way. Like for dementia, I know that she is going to be eventually unable to care for her own self.
yeah.
So I think sitting down and having those hard discussions and understanding what you both expect and need from these discussions. And then
Hmm.
I'm always like, have a plan.
Yeah. So clear, transparent communication before things get to a crisis point so that you have that to fall back on because you've worked so hard to establish and maintain that bond. When a family is in a crisis and they are at a decision point and there's maybe some differences of opinion going on, what are some things that we can do to kind of de escalate maybe any of the flamey feelings that are going on in that crisis to stay focused on the goal, whether it's the child in question or the elderly parent in question?
I think keeping in mind ultimately that the big goal is to make sure that everyone has what they need and they're safe and cared for.
Mm-hmm.
So I know sometimes, especially when you're talking about care for an elderly relative, that, there's potential financial issues that might come in, or, somebody might not agree with someone's mom's house for her caregiving expenses because it was supposed to come to them. So I have found that, the planning, the legal planning plays a key role in trying to figure out what you're going to do as far as what's going to happen in the future. And that helps with making things very plain and very clear.
And if you can, prior to the crisis, get the elderly parent involved in the
Yes.
conversation also. What are their wishes? What do they need from this conversation so that everybody can be working together? And we always suggest that anytime you're bringing a young person into your home in a care situation as a relative, what is the expectation for this relationship and what are the resources, who's going to be able to give what and support how, and having all that clear prior to the crisis as much as you possibly can. And I recognize that when we're dealing with bringing children into our homes, it isn't always we're not able to do that prior to bringing the child home, because often in a kinship relationship, these children are coming to us as a result of the crisis that
Right.
is usually unexpected. However, when we are dealing with elderly parents or family members, maybe we see the decline coming, we see the lack of mobility coming, and we can talk about it in advance. One final interruption to let you know about our library of free courses. Thanks to the partnership with the Jockey Being Family Foundation that Creating a Family enjoys, we can offer you 15 free online courses. You can take 1, 2, or all of them, and they're all aimed at strengthening your family in whatever stage and age and life season your family is at. You can find those courses at bit.ly/JBF support. That's bit.ly/JBF support. And as I said, you can take 1 or 2 or all 15 to strengthen your family and support you in this season of sandwich caregiving. And that's the last interruption, so we'll get back to the interview now. What are some of the resources or programs that Generations United offers that caregivers in that sandwich should know about for their family?
So Generations United we have like 3 umbrellas, right? So we do, we do have the National Center on Grandfamilies, which is our kinship care part. We have the National Grandfamilies and Kinship Technical Assistance Unit, and then also our intergenerational programming.
Mm-hmm.
So on gu.org, I tried to just kind of narrow it down, but there are so many resources that you can get in there and connect to different resources nationwide and also in your communities in the state or on the ground.
Yep.
So it's difficult to narrow that down.
If you go to gu.org, you'll see they've got a directory where you can find resources by state. They have topics that you can search for. The search engine, I've used it many times for the resources that I'm looking for. The search function on gu.org is quite robust and very helpful, and families will find a lot of resources, some of which they didn't even know they needed.
Right.
To help them find what they're looking for.
We also have grandfamilies.org. So you can get on there and look through there, and there's just so many things. Also, I want to mention that we have a new program that we just rolled out. It's called Grandfamilies and Kinship University, and it's a national leadership and community impact program for kinship caregivers raising children.
Oh, great. Send me the link for that, and I'll make sure we include it in the show notes.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then as we're kind of wrapping up the conversation here, I would love to end on a positive note. What are some of the strengths that you see in these families, the big families that have caregiving going on at the early start of life, in the middle of life, and then towards the end of life?
So there's so much, right?
Yeah.
So I mentioned before the strong family bonds. And I'm telling you, you do get to build deep and meaningful relationships within all of these generations, and that just keeps your family healthier and stronger together. But also, for me, there's a sense of like purpose and fulfillment. And some people feel a strong sense of pride when helping their loved ones, and it's satisfying knowing, especially when you look at if you're raising your grandchildren, the difference that you've made in their lives from the time that you've got them to now, or being part of a tribal community, it's passing down traditions is extremely rewarding for me.
Yeah.
And then also, I think there are some instances of growth, like emotional growth. You learn or develop more patience and definitely develop more resilience, right?
Yeah.
And then watching different facets and generations of your family interact really, can bring joy and perspective to just simple things that you're doing every day.
Yeah.
And for some people, there's, financial savings, maybe your mother that you're caring for can help you with childcare, or, you can be able to consolidate. For some people, that helps. And then also, I think the main thing is keeping families close together. The more people you have around a child that loves them, the better it is, just the better day it is, you know.
Yeah. And I would say that that's true also then of the elderly parent or
Yes,
relative who's facing, a brand new stage of life, that it gives them purpose. It gives them that sense of community and connection, and getting to see their legacy, living right out in front of them can be a really beautiful strength. And I think anytime we have the opportunity to expose our kids to multi levels of generations, it's so good for them because it develops their perspective that it's not just all about them, that there's so much more that they're anchored into.
right. And, as an example, or a couple examples, my mother forgets most things, but she remembers that there was a new baby born a couple of months ago. She remembers his name. She remembers how much he weighed.
Oh,
She remembers those things. And then I try to make it a point to help my grandchildren and my children understand that they are the results of the hopes and dreams of the people that came before them and their families, right?
yeah,
So everything that our grandparents and great grandparents and other ancestors went through to get to where we are now,
yeah,
those children are the result of that. So,
yeah, yeah. And that's such a beautiful way for a child to view themselves, but also be viewed by the other adults around them. Yeah. Well, Robyn, thank you so much for spending some time with us today to talk about the sandwich generation and being a sandwich caregiver, kind of being stuck in the middle of, raising children and, supporting and caring for elderly relatives, parents is a very heavy emotional load. But as you so eloquently pointed out, there's some beautiful joys and strengths to it also. We will list in our show notes for the listeners the resources and links to Generations United and the other affiliated organizations. And we want to say thank you again for your time with us today.
thank you so much, Tracy.